future doctors. Welcome back to Best Medicine's GCSE AQA Biology lecture series. Today, we'll be beginning the chapter of diseases, and we're going to be starting with communicable diseases. So what are communicable diseases? Communicable essentially means transferable, right? So communicable diseases would mean diseases that can be transferred from one person to another. And these diseases are usually caused by pathogens. Okay, pathogen. So what is a pathogen? A pathogen is a disease-causing agent like a fungi, a bacteria, a virus that can be transferred from one person to another. So if the pathogen can be transferred, then the disease can be transferred, and therefore we have the communicable diseases. Communicable diseases are also called infectious diseases, and some examples include malaria, right, which is a communicable disease because it is caused by a pathogen called malaria. AIDS, which we had a brief look at earlier, that's caused by HIV, and flu, right, which is a viral illness. Then the other type of diseases are those that cannot be transferred from one person to another, and those are called non-communicable diseases. Examples of these include coronary heart disease, cancer, diabetes. These are diseases that are caused by diet, genes, environmental exposures, etc. So for example, if a person is exposed to a particular toxic exposure, they develop the disease. But of course, they cannot transfer that disease to another person because the other person is not exposed to that exposure, right? Same for genetic diseases, right? So for example, we have looked at cystic fibrosis is a disease that I mentioned. That's a genetic disease. Another genetic disease is sickle cell disease, right? All these diseases, again, are non-communicable. Cancer is also a very popular non-communicable disease. So impacts on health. Well, both types, both communicable as well as non-communicable, can affect health, but additional factors can also play a role. So other factors that can affect health are your diet, for example, right? Insufficient or improper nutrition can lead to various diseases. Stress. Some stress is normal, but excessive stress is linked to many different diseases. For example, heart disease, cancer, mental health issues, most importantly, okay? And life situations. What does life situation mean? Life situation basically means a person's geographic location, their gender, their socioeconomic status, their access to healthcare. For example, in third world countries, access to healthcare is poor, right, as compared to first world countries. Family size. A large family size might mean that you're being neglected. Environmental conditions. How friendly the environment is towards the health. For example, if there's a lot of toxins in the air or not, how clean the air is, how clean everything else is. Significantly influence the health outcomes ranging from communicable diseases like diarrhea and malaria to non-communicable diseases such as heart disease and cancer. Now, various diseases and health conditions, they can occur simultaneously and they can interact with each other and so on. So for example, viruses, right? That's a viral illness, but viruses can lead to non-communicable diseases like cancers. An example of this is HPV. HPV is a very common virus. It's called human papillomavirus and can lead to cervical cancer in females. So again, this is an example of interaction between different diseases. A viral illness is causing a cancer. Immune system defects leading to susceptibility to communicable diseases. So somebody can get, for example, cancer, like a lymphoma or leukemia, right? Now that's a non-communicable disease, but then that leads to susceptibility to communicable diseases, infectious diseases, because the immune system is weakened. So we have this interconnectedness of many different types of diseases as well as of physical and mental health. Okay? So before trying to understand the communicable diseases, which is our topic today, we need to understand the different types of pathogens that will cause them. So the first pathogen that we're going to do are viruses, okay? So viruses are microscopic infectious agents. These are very, very small. They're much smaller than bacteria, and they cannot be seen with a light microscope. We need an electron microscope to see viruses. Now, the way they infect cells is that they put their genetic material inside cells and they replicate inside living cells. What they consist of is a genetic material surrounded by a protein coat called a capsid, and viruses cause various diseases by hijacking host cell machinery. So let me just quickly show you how this would work. So let's say you have a normal cell, right? So here's a normal cell, and then you get a virus. So here's a virus, and the virus has this attachment proteins on top of it, and then it would have a genetic material, maybe this is DNA or some other genetic material which codes for genes for the virus's proteins. And it has got this code which is called the capsid. And on top of it, you've got the attachment proteins. So as soon as the virus attaches to a particular cell, it injects its DNA or RNA, the genetic material, into the cell, right? So the cell would have a nucleus as well. Okay, so once this genetic material goes into the cell, it essentially hijacks the cell's ability to make proteins. So now the cell is hijacked, and now it's going to start making viral proteins, right? Instead of making normal proteins, it's going to start making viral proteins. Now, one way to do this is that the virus's genetic material is directly used, right? Directly used to make viral proteins. One is the direct method, and the other is that you get this genetic material to be incorporated into the normal cell's DNA. So let's say this is the normal cell's DNA in green. The blue one is going to come in here and become part of the green one. Okay, and so now as the cell makes its normal proteins using the DNA, it also starts making these viral proteins as well. Okay, so there's two methods. One is the direct method, that the genetic material of the virus is directly used, and the other is that it becomes part of the genetic material of the cell that it infects and then starts making these viral proteins. So once we get these viral proteins and viral genetic material, right, then we get new viruses. So you'll have a lot more viruses being made, newer viruses being made, right? And each of them would have the genetic material on the inside. And once these accumulate too much in the cell is going to end up exploding, releasing all the viruses outside. Okay? And that's how the cell will die, releasing all the viruses outside. So when this occurs, this obviously causes damage to cells. Now, the symptoms of a viral illness depends on which cells are being infected. So for example, if you could have something like coronavirus, which will go into the lungs. So if this was coronavirus, this is going to go into a lung cell, right? So this would be a lung cell. And so once the lung cell gets harmed and starts dying, you're going to get symptoms of a lung infection, such as cough, right? And fever and weakness. If the cell infects your intestine, if the virus infects your intestines, then you're going to get intestinal symptoms like diarrhea and stomach pain. But the same mechanism would be happening there, okay? It's causing damage to cells in different parts of the body. So different types of viruses include pneumonia, right? Pneumonia is a viral illness that can be caused by viruses. Pneumonia is not a virus, but it is an illness that is caused by viruses, like coronavirus pneumonia. Measles is a virus. Human immunodeficiency virus, which causes AIDS, is also a virus. COVID-19 is a virus. Chickenpox is a disease that is caused by a virus, right? And tobacco mosaic virus. This is a viral illness in plants. And next up, we have bacteria. So bacteria, we've already looked at. Bacteria is a prokaryote, which means that it does not have a nucleus, and it has that flagellum, and it's got this circular DNA. Now, bacteria is able to also infect cells. So either it directly damages cells, or it produces these toxins that damage cells. So, for example, there's two different ways, right? One way is that they directly damage a cell. So if this is a cell, the bacteria is just going to go and damage it. Okay, maybe it can try to invade this cell. Another way by which bacteria can damage cells is that if this is a cell, the bacteria is producing these toxins. Okay, so these toxins are coming and these are damaging cells. Okay, so two ways. Now, bacteria, they divide by binary fission, which we've already done, right? And they replicate very quickly. Now, the medicines that we use to treat bacterial infections are called antibiotics, right? Antibiotics are used. And a popular example of an antibiotic that is in your syllabus is called penicillin, which we'll do in its own section as well. A popular example Viruses are treated with antivirals. Okay, antivirals. Fungi. Fungi is the other kind of pathogen. So fungi are diverse are organisms that include yeast, right, molds, mushrooms, etc. And they usually are involved in the composition of food, but they can also cause diseases like athlete's foot and fungal infections. So we'll have a look at these in a bit. Now, fungi can exist as a yeast form, which is just a single cell, right, just cells, or they can exist as these long thread-like structures. If you've ever seen mold, this is how it looks like. So these thread-like structures, and these are called hyphae. Okay, and that's the mold form. So either a fungi exists as a yeast form, which is a unicellular, or it can it can exist as a mold form, which means that it contains these thread-like structures called hyphae. Okay. So how are pathogens spread? We can, like I said, we can spread these pathogens from one person to another. And if you're able to do this, then the other person can also get the disease. So how can we spread these pathogens? And this is relatively straightforward. Most of you are aware of this. As you grow up, you're taught all of this information. So one of the examples is direct contact, which is transmission would occur through physical contact with an infected individual or a contaminated surface. For example, if I have COVID, right, and I just sneeze on my hand and I shake your hand, right, then what will happen is that I'm trying to transmit the COVID through my hand onto you. Airborne transmission. Airborne transmission is when pathogens spread through droplets in the air, like coughing or sneezing, right? And that's a very popular way of spreading COVID-19, for which we are supposed to wear masks to avoid this. Then we also have vector-borne transmission. Vector is an organism that is able to carry the pathogen from one person to another. Examples of vectors include mosquitoes, which can take a blood meal from an infected person and then take another blood meal from a non-infected person and transmit the disease. Ticks, right, and some other organisms. So malaria's vector is the female Anopheles mosquito. Waterborne transmission. Pathogens can also be spread through contaminated water sources. If water is dirty, water is not cleaned. This leads to infections when ingested or exposed to mucous membranes. For example, cholera. Mucous membranes are those membranes that could produce mucus, like the small intestine. So, for example, cholera. Cholera is a very popular, very popular bacteria that causes diarrhea, and it's very popular in third world countries, like especially South Asia, for example, Bangladesh and India and Pakistan. And lastly, food transmission. Pathogens can also be spread by contaminated food, or especially undercooked food. Right, undercooked food is very popular. For example, salmonella, which is a very popular bacteria that causes diarrhea. Normally, when we talk about food poisoning, it's mostly being caused by salmonella. And usually what we do is we maybe eat some undercooked chicken. So undercooked chicken causes salmonella food poisoning, which is characterized by abdominal pain and diarrhea, okay? So food transmission is another very popular way of spreading pathogens. Now, to prevent being infected, to prevent infectious diseases, it would be very simple to just to be able to study these ways of spread and avoid them, right? So if you can avoid direct contact, avoid airborne transmission, avoid vector-borne transmission, avoid waterborne transmission, avoid foodborne transmission, then we'll be able to prevent the diseases. And so our preventive measures would depend on these mechanisms of pathogen spread. So let's have a look at prevention. Now, one very popular work of developing the preventive procedures is the work of Ignaz Semmelweis. Semmelweis essentially was a person who he proposed the procedures of hand washing, right, to reduce the spread of infections before doing any surgical procedures. So he was essentially the pioneer to the concept of antiseptic medicine. Okay, now prevention techniques. Prevention techniques focus on reducing the spread of infections, and then you would have different techniques. For example, a good hygiene, right? For example, proper hand washing, hand sanitizer use, disinfecting surfaces. This would decrease the way of spread of contact, right? Direct contact transmission would be reduced by a good hygiene. Isolating affected individuals. If you're isolating affected individuals, this would reduce the spread by direct as well as vector and airborne transmission. Okay? Third, destroying or limiting vectors. If you destroy limit vectors, for example, using mosquito nets, mosquito repellents, not leaving stagnant water where mosquitoes can reproduce, and then you would be preventing the spread through vectors, right? And number 4, vaccination. Now, vaccination doesn't actually prevent the spread directly, however, indirectly it does so, but however, it does provide you with immunity. So if you're immune, then you're pretty much responding very quickly. Remember, you're getting that fast second response every time. So the disease will not be able to cause any harm to you. And if that is the case, and also the disease will cure very quickly. So if that is the case, then you have a lesser chance of spreading it, okay? And that is how the spreading would also reduce, because you're getting well a lot sooner than you normally would. Okay, so the first kind of diseases that we're going to start with are viral diseases. And the first viral disease is measles. So what is measles? Measles is a virus, right? And this is characterized by, and you need to remember this, fever, cough, and a rash. Okay, a very distinctive rash. So fever, cough, and a rash is measles. And also you need to remember that it is spread through respiratory droplets. It is airborne transmission. Now, measles can be prevented by a very popular vaccine called the MMR vaccine. MMR essentially means measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. So this essentially provides you immunity against not just measles, but also mumps and rubella. Number 2, which is very, very important and a little bit difficult, is HIV. Because we have a good background on this, hopefully this will be very easy. So HIV, human immunodeficiency virus, is a retrovirus. What is a retrovirus? This needs a little bit of a background, so let's go ahead and study a little bit. So remember that in a cell, to make a protein, you have the DNA, right? Now the DNA, if this is the DNA, contains on its surface genes. Now these genes are copied into a messenger that takes the message of that particular gene to the ribosome, which is outside the nucleus. Remember, the DNA cannot leave the nucleus and go outside to the ribosome to tell it what protein to make. No, the message needs to be copied into a messenger. And that messenger is called the messenger RNA, okay? Message RNA. That is another type of genetic material. Now this messenger RNA is going to take this message outside the nucleus to the ribosome. And now the ribosome will know what protein to make, right? And it will make us a protein. So this is going to go ahead and give us a protein. Now HIV is an RNA virus. If HIV wants to infect a cell, let's make another cell here. Similar cell, so similar machinery and everything. So here's a cell and it's got those ribosomes and so on. Now HIV is an RNA virus. If HIV comes in, here's HIV. The HIV will have its own genetic material. So here's the genetic material of HIV. This is an RNA. And together with this RNA, HIV also has something called reverse transcriptase enzyme. What does transcriptase means? This needs to be taken a look at again. So the DNA, when we copied information of genes from the DNA into an mRNA, we said this particular process essentially is called transcription, okay? So this arrow here, copying the DNA genetic information into an mRNA, is called transcription. Transcription. If you are able to reverse this, go from an mRNA to DNA, which is usually not possible, except in such rare cases when you have HIV, Going from mRNA to DNA would be reverse transcription. So HIV contains an enzyme called reverse transcriptase. So let's see what it does. Well, remember when viruses infect cells, then they inject their genetic material into cells. So this particular cell, which is a T helper cell, remember HIV only infects T helper cells. So in the T helper cell, the RNA is going to come in, right? And the reverse transcriptase is going to come in. And what this reverse transcriptase is going to do is that it's going to convert this RNA back into DNA, okay? So the RNA is going to become DNA here. Here's double-stranded DNA. And now this DNA will be taken into the host cell's DNA. So here's the host cell's DNA. And it will be incorporated into this. Maybe we can make this green. So if this is green, this green bit is going to be incorporated into the host cell's DNA. Okay, so when the host cell makes its proteins, right, when it makes its proteins to the ribosome, then on top of making normal proteins, it also makes viral proteins, making more and more viruses. Okay, so two things would occur. When this ribosome makes proteins, it makes normal proteins, and it makes HIV proteins. At the same time, you would also be making a lot of HIV RNA. And together, they would give you more HIV molecules, more HIV viruses. Okay? So that is reverse transcriptase. Now, such kinds of viruses that are able to convert their RNA to DNA and then incorporate it into the host cell's genetic material instead of being directly used, these are called retroviruses, okay? So these are called retroviruses. Retroviruses. Now, why is this important? The reason why this is important is because on your boards, you are expected to know that drugs that are able to treat retroviruses are called antiretrovirals, okay? So treatment, TX as treatment, is antiretroviral drugs, which is the answer to one of the questions I asked in a previous video. Antiretroviral drugs are used to treat HIV, okay? An example of antiretroviral drug is an inhibitor of reverse transcriptase, for example, right? So if you have a drug that will inhibit this, then you will not be able to do reverse transcription, and the HIV will not be able to properly infect the T helper cells, and that is a drug that we can use to slow down the progress of HIV. Now, what is the mode of infection of HIV? HIV actually is an STI, a sexually transmitted infection. What this means is that it can be transmitted through sexual products, blood products, needles, right, and anything that involves mucus secretions. What will happen in HIV infection is that it will go ahead and infect T helper cells. And if you remember, if you knock out T helper cells, then all of the immunity is gone, and you will not be able to protect yourself against diseases. So it leads to a weakened immune system and increased susceptibility to infections that are called opportunistic infections. That is also a very important term. Opportunistic infections are those infectious agents, those pathogens that would normally not cause you a disease, right? So very weak pathogens, normally they live on your skin and on your nose and maybe inside your throat as well, but they don't cause you any harm because your immune system, which is very strong, keeps them in check. However, if you, not you, but somebody else gets HIV, right? Then the T helper cells will be gone, and the immune system will not be able to keep those pathogens in check. So they will see the opportunity to strike, right? And when they see the opportunity to strike, they're as a result, they are called the opportunistic infections. Now, how can we prevent acquiring HIV? Very easy, right? Because we understand the method of transmission, which is sexual transmission and blood products and needles, we can avoid those things. The prevention includes practicing safe sex, limiting sex partners and so on, using condoms, using sterile needles, right? Especially among drug users, and antiretroviral therapy. However, if somebody does get infected with the HIV virus, then currently, as of right now, there's no cure to it. Now, a question might arise in your mind. You might say, but Mr. Noor, you just said that we use antiretroviral drugs to treat them. You're right, we do it, but that just slows down the process. It doesn't completely cure the person, okay? Now, whenever somebody gets HIV, it has 3 phases, okay? So the first phase involves a flu-like illness for the first 1 to 3 weeks, or maybe 1 to 2 months even. Can be more than this. And then it goes away, right, for about 10 years. And then after 10 years, it just suddenly comes back. And when it comes back, then it starts doing all these things and killing all the T helper cells, and then you just lose all the immunity all of a sudden. So you acquire this immunodeficiency, and we call that acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. Okay, so here's a summary of what happens. So upon contracting HIV, it's going to affect the white blood cells, especially the T helper cells, which mediate almost all the other white blood cells' functions. So after attaching to the host cell, it sends its RNA and reverse transcriptase enzyme into the host cell. The RNA is converted into DNA by reverse transcriptase, and then that is inserted into the host cell's DNA. So when the host cell will make its proteins, it will also make HIV RNA and proteins, eventually making more HIV viruses. Okay, and it will also die in the process. So treatment is usually based on inhibiting the reverse transcriptase enzyme, and that is done by medications called antiretrovirals. So as more and more T helper cells die, lesser is the function of other white blood cells, and therefore the immunity weakens. And when the immunity weakens, then weak pathogens will strike, right? They will see the opportunity and strike, and they are called, as a result, opportunistic infections. It is these opportunistic infections that eventually kill the person. Okay, the person doesn't die directly from HIV, but these opportunistic infections can kill the person. Sometimes the person may even get different kinds of cancers because of those opportunistic infections. If someone contracts HIV, the first 24 to 72 hours are very important because, and they should seek help ASAP, right? It could save their life. So that's just an extra information that you should know as an educated individual, and you should also be able to tell other people. So again, a little bit of extra information here is that HIV is transmitted using non-sterile syringes and tools, especially among drug addicts, pregnancy, breastfeeding, blood transfusions, if they are not screened, usually in the UK and most developed countries these are screened, organ transplants, if not properly screened, unprotected sex, the most common. HIV is not transmitted by food, drink, utensils. It is not transmitted by insect bites. It is also, very importantly, you might be curious about this, not transmitted by kissing or touching, okay? Kissing does not transmit HIV. It is not transmitted by wearing clothes and towels, and not by toilet or showers. And next up we have the, and this one is very simple. Tobacco mosaic virus is a virus that affects tobacco, tomatoes, and other plants, causing mosaic-like patterns of discoloration. So fragmented patterns, spread out patterns of discoloration of the leaves. Essentially, it causes the chlorophyll to go away. So when the leaves are discolored, when there's no chlorophyll, no color means no chlorophyll, then what happens is that there's no photosynthesis, right? And when there's no photosynthesis, then you're not able to produce any glucose, any amino acids, and resultantly, there is a decreased growth of the plant, right? Decreased growth. Nowadays, what the scientists are trying to do is that they're trying to use something called selective breeding, which is covered in ecology. And they're trying to use something called genetic engineering, which is also covered later, to try to develop tobacco mosaic virus resistant strains, okay? Resistant strains. And that concludes our section on HIV, on viruses. And next up, we have bacterial diseases. Okay, so the other type of pathogens are bacteria. Bacteria are prokaryotes. Salmonella is an important type of bacteria that you need to know for AQA GCSE. So salmonella would be a bacteria, and this is usually present in contaminated food. So salmonella, which is a common bacteria, it leads to food poisoning. Essentially, what this means is that it's going to go into the small intestines, and the stomach and large intestines, usually basically the abdomen, and it's going to cause damage there. And we've already looked at how bacteria can infect cells, right? Either from outside, or it just damages cells directly, or it can produce different toxins. So whatever the method is, essentially it's damaging those cells in the gut. And when that happens, you get these symptoms in your abdomen, like diarrhea and vomiting and fever, okay? Fever is a very non-specific symptom, which is mostly associated with most infections, okay? Most infections include fever. Transmission. So again, a salmonella is transmitted by contaminated food, especially, and I want you to remember this, undercooked poultry, okay, especially undercooked chicken. So if you're going outside to eat, make sure that the place that you're eating at, the chicken is very well fried, okay, or cooked. Undercooked eggs, meat, unpasteurized dairy products is the primary source of salmonella infection. So how can we prevent this? Obviously, prevention would be very easy because now we understand how this is transmitted. So proper food handling and proper cooking, thorough cooking, good hygiene practices, and maintaining cleanliness in foods, food preparation areas help prevent salmonella contamination. Salmonella is a very popular source of food poisoning among people who get this food poisoning from restaurants, right? Because some restaurants might not have the best cleanliness procedures going on, okay? Now, risks. Severe cases of salmonella infection may lead to dehydration, extreme dehydration, which can require medical attention, and people who are elderly and young children are more susceptible. So what is the treatment for salmonella? Well, somebody gets salmonella, it's mostly a self-limited infection, so it goes away on its own. However, you have to take rehydration therapy, okay? ORS stands for oral rehydration therapy. These are small sachets that you can get from the market. You don't need a prescription for this, and you can mix it in water and drink it. And what this will do is that it will replenish all the water that you're losing in diarrhea and all the electrolytes, the salts that you're losing in the diarrhea. Severe cases of salmonella are treated usually in hospitals and are treated with antibiotics. So again, symptoms of salmonella is diarrhea, stomach pains, fever, nausea and vomiting, and sometimes even a headache. And here's a meme for it. So in case of a diarrhea apocalypse, we have this big, huge tissue roll. Okay, so next bacterial infection is called gonorrhea. You've probably heard of this. This is another STI. So the first STI that we did, sexually transmitted infection, was HIV. And the second is gonorrhea. So gonorrhea is transmitted by Neisseria gonorrhea, which is a bacteria, and it primarily affects the genital tract. So what will happen in this is that people will have painful urination and a very characteristic discharge. Okay? A very characteristic discharge from the sexual organs of both males and females, and it's a white colored discharge. It kind of looks like pus, and that is a characteristic of gonorrhea. So how can we prevent gonorrhea? Well, obviously, just like we prevented HIV by prevention through safe sex practices, right? And of course, prompt treatment with antibiotics are crucial in controlling its spread. It can easily spread to other organs. For example, it can go from the vagina to the uterus in females, which can lead to infertility. So to be able to prevent this, you want to very quickly and thoroughly treat this. Okay, some honorable mentions for bacterial diseases include typhoid fever, which is caused by another type of salmonella. This is called Salmonella paratyphi. Cholera is, we mentioned this briefly, but cholera essentially is a bacteria that is very common in underdeveloped countries such as South Asian countries, and this results in a watery type of diarrhea. Okay, that's a different kind of diarrhea than salmonella. Salmonella has something called inflammatory diarrhea in doctors' terms. This is a watery type of diarrhea. It's very, very watery when you have it in cholera. Then the other one is Mycobacterium tuberculosis. This causes TB. Streptococcus pneumonia is the most common cause of pneumonia in humans. Okay. Of course, we don't need to memorize any of these because these are just honorable mentions. Okay, and we get a meme. Me to my gut bacteria while taking an antibiotic. Remember, gut bacteria is the good bacteria, right? It's the good bacteria that keeps our gut health in check. So when we take an antibiotic, not only are the harmful bacteria killed, but some of our gut bacteria also get killed. So hence the code here. Some of you may die, but that's a sacrifice I am willing to make. Quite evil, if you ask me. Okay, so question for you guys, and I would like for you guys to answer this. How do we minimize the chances of antibiotic resistance from developing? So whenever you're taking antibiotic, there's a chance that we have antibiotic resistance. So can you research this and code the question and your nickname with the answer, please? And that is the end of the human disease-causing bacteria. One plant bacteria is called Agrobacterium tumefaciens. Usually I've not seen a question on this. It's not very high yield, but essentially what this does is that it causes tumor-like growths in plants. Okay, so here's a plant, and you see these tumor-like growths in plants. That is caused by Agrobacterium tumefaciens. And next up we have fungal diseases. So one of the most popular fungal diseases, remember fungi are pathogens that exist either as yeast or they can exist as mold, hyphae. So fungi can cause athlete's foot. This is caused by a fungi popularly known as dermatophytes. Derma comes from skin. Derma essentially stands for skin, okay? So dermatophytes are fungi that cause skin infections, for example, athlete's foot. Athlete's foot is a fungal infection that commonly affects skin between the toes, causing itching, redness, and peeling. And because dermatophytes, they thrive in warm and moist environments, like sweaty socks and shoes, if you don't have a proper foot hygiene, then you'll have an increased risk for this, especially athletes who have sweaty feet, and sometimes some of them might not have the best hygiene, then they are susceptible to developing this disease. So it's better to have proper foot hygiene, and wearing breathable footwear is essential for prevention, okay? The other type of fungal disease is called rose black spot disease. This is a little bit similar than to tobacco mosaic virus. So rose black spot is a fungal disease that affects rose plants. And again, what this does essentially is it causes discoloration of the leaves. But instead of becoming yellow, they become black. Okay, so it causes black spots to develop on the leaves, and eventually leaf yellowing and drop. So basically, if you have black spots on the leaves, then you don't have any photosynthesis going on there. If you don't have photosynthesis, you're not going to have any growth. Eventually, it will lead to falling off of the leaves. Now, regular pruning, proper watering, and the use of fungicides can help prevent and manage the spread, ensuring healthy rose bushes. Again, this is not very high yield. This is not high yield, and this is not high yield. I rarely see any questions on this. But yeah. Next up, we have protists. So protists are another type of pathogen that can cause diseases. Malaria is quite high yield, and you need to know very well about malaria. So malaria is a disease that is caused by protists. And malaria is very common in Africa. So this is a parasitic infection transmitted by female Anopheles mosquitoes. Okay, you need to understand that it is transmitted by female Anopheles mosquito. So when the female Anopheles mosquito that carries the pathogen takes a blood meal to an uninfected person, she can transmit the disease, transmit the pathogen, malarial pathogen, into the person. So when they enter the bloodstream, they infect the liver cells. Okay, that's important. So first they infect the liver cells, and then they will go into the red blood cells and inhabit there. So once you get an infection, well, the first thing a non-specific, very common symptom of any infection is fever. So you're going to get fever, you're going to get night chills and night sweats, and so on. So symptoms include fever, chills, headache, and muscle aches. Okay? Fatigue, nausea, and vomiting are non-specific symptoms. Treatment. What is the treatment for malaria? Well, that is an anti-malarial medication like chloroquine. You don't have to, for the sake of exams, you don't have to remember this drug. However, it's a popular drug, and it was mentioned in the book, so I've mentioned it here, okay? Mosquito bite prevention measures. So we have to prevent, because it's being transmitted by a vector, and we can just stop the spread of the vector. How can we do this? Well, one of the things that we can do is we can prevent the vector from biting us, right? For example, bed nets, insect repellent, etc. Another thing that we can do is uh, removing any water sources and any breeding sites for the mosquitoes to spread. The third thing that we can do is we can take some medications as a prophylaxis, as a preventive measure. So we call that chemoprophylaxis when traveling. So when we're traveling to an endemic area, for example, Africa, then we can take drugs already so that if we have the drugs already in our system and malaria comes in, it will not be able to do any damage. Okay? Some other protist diseases include Giardia. Giardia is another infection that is Giardia is present in fresh water. It's a protist that is present in fresh water, and if you're able to drink fresh water containing Giardia, it causes another type of diarrhea. And we get a meme. So, my lord, a lady, malaria. Okay. Defense against pathogens. So, as human beings, how can we defend ourselves from pathogens? Well, we have two different kinds of defenses. One of them is called one kind is called external defenses, which include a couple of things. So, external defenses would mean that you are trying to defend the pathogen from entering your body, okay, from going into your body. But then we also have internal immune defenses, okay? So external defenses and internal defenses. Internal would be that you have these pathogens already in your body. So external defenses would include number one, the skin, right? The skin is essentially a physical barrier because the skin is very hard, right, and waterproof, and it also secretes some antimicrobial secretions through its glands. So it acts as a physical barrier as well as a little bit of a chemical barrier. The other one is mucous membranes. So what are mucous membranes? Mucous membranes are those membranes that line the inside of passages inside the body. For example, we already talked about goblet cells producing mucus in the respiratory tract. So that is a mucous membrane. Another type of mucous membrane would be the esophagus, the small intestines. Okay, so these are mucous membranes that line various passages and cavities of the body. For example, the respiratory epithelium was producing mucus, which is being removed by cilia, etc. Now, the mucus will trap and expel the pathogens. And also, the mucus contains antibodies, okay? Antibodies are present in the mucus, which means that you're able to... Remember saliva, right? Saliva would contain some antibodies. If you've ever gotten tested for COVID, what they do is they collect some mucus from your mouth and test the antibodies for it. So mucus would contain antibodies that are able to get rid of these pathogens, as well as mucus is able to trap the pathogens. And then we have tears. Tears contain a hydrolytic enzyme that is able to destroy bacterial cell walls. Saliva contains antibacterial enzymes, and as well as some antibodies. Stomach acid. Stomach acid. When we were doing the digestive system chapter, we mentioned this. The stomach is able to directly kill bacteria because it is so corrosive, right? So it directly kills bacteria. Most of the ingested pathogens are killed by the stomach acid. Normal flora. What is normal flora? We just talked about this, right? We saw a meme that we take an antibiotic and our normal gut bacteria also dies. Normal flora are beneficial microbes that reside on skin and mucous membranes, such as the intestine. And what they do is that they compete with pathogens. So basically, these are the ones that take away the food and all the other resources from pathogens and prevent them from growing, okay? They also produce antimicrobial substances to kill them and themselves survive. So these are external defenses. But once a pathogen makes it inside your body, then internal immune defenses would have to come into effect. And we've already done this, so I'm just going to mention their names, but you can refer to the cardiovascular system chapter in which we discuss white blood cells to have a deeper look at this. So internal immune defenses would include white blood cells, leukocytes, of which there's phagocytes, which will engulf and digest the pathogens, and then lymphocytes. Lymphocytes would be of two types. You have B lymphocytes that will make plasma cells, that will make antibodies, and memory cells that will store the information so that if there is a second exposure or second Or third exposure, it would result in a fast immune response. So antibodies, remember, antibodies look like Y-shaped proteins, and they're able to agglutinate, clump, and neutralize toxins and mark the pathogens for phagocytosis. Here, bacteria infects the same body for the second time and B memory cells. You picked the wrong house, fool. Right, GDF5 meme here. Okay, and then we have T lymphocytes, and T lymphocytes include T killer cells, which directly secrete toxins to kill infected and cancer cells, and then T helper cells. And we've been talking about T helper cells for a very long time now. They help mediate and activate all the other white blood cells. However, unfortunately, sometimes in some individuals, these can be targeted by HIV, so the entire immune system shuts off in acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, AIDS. Okay, so when there is lowered immunity, then weak pathogens see the opportunity to strike, and they're called opportunistic infections. And remember what drug is used to treat HIV? Antiretroviral drugs. And what enzyme do antiretroviral drugs inhibit? Reverse transcriptase. Okay? Over here we have a meme. So the immune system, it protects its attack, but most importantly, on bacteria its neck. Phagocytosis. Okay, more on plant diseases. So aphids are parasites. These are tiny insects found on plants. And what they do is they suck sap from leaves and stems, okay? And usually what they do is that they have this piercing, like a mosquito's piercing that pierces the skin. They have this piercing that directly goes into the phloem. And remember, the phloem was the vascular tissue that carries glucose and amino acids. So they're able to extract those glucose and amino acids, causing the plant to damage and transmitting diseases. So they reproduce quickly and often form large colonies, for example, as shown in this particular image. And these can be controlled using natural predators or insecticides. A ladybug is also an aphid. Yep. We all thought they were very cute, but they are also aphids. I'm not cute, I'm evil. Interesting. Okay, some of the mineral deficiencies. These are not communicable diseases. These are just mineral deficiencies that could occur in plants. So nitrate deficiency. Remember, nitrogen was required to make amino acids or proteins. Remember, proteins would have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So you need nitrogen to make proteins. So if you don't have nitrate ions or nitrogen ions in the soil, it's going to lead to lesser amino acids, which means that lesser proteins and lesser growth. Lesser proteins and then lesser growth. Phosphate deficiency. Phosphate, remember, was present in the DNA, right? Let me just quickly remind you that DNA is a double-stranded helix, right? And it was made up of DNA nucleotides, which contained a phosphate, a ribose sugar, and a base, right? And number 3, we have magnesium. Magnesium helps make chlorophyll. That's very important, okay? So chlorophyll, which helps in absorbing sunlight to conduct photosynthesis, is made from or by the help of magnesium ions. So if you're low in magnesium, then you're not going to have chlorophyll, which means yellower leaves, and you won't be able to absorb sunlight. So if you cannot absorb light, then you cannot do photosynthesis, and therefore lesser plant growth again, okay? Magnesium deficiency, by the way, is called chlorosis. Okay, chlorosis. So what are the defenses of plants against microorganisms? Well, we've looked at the defenses of animals. What are the defenses of plants? Some of the plants' defenses are poisons, which is a chemical defense. Okay, so that's a chemical defense. Thorns, which is a physical defense. Okay, and curling, again, a physical defense. And mimicry, mimicking an unhealthy plant, behavioral defense. Plants outside. Concrete, cozy. Plants at home. Is this tap water? I am allergic. A lot like bacteria outside and bacteria in lab, right? Very difficult to grow the ones that are in a lab. Okay, question again, what type of drugs are used to treat HIV? What part of the body does malaria infect? And what are the different types of white blood cells? So I want you to answer this, and I'm waiting for them. Okay, so send it to me. This was all covered in this particular video as well. And again, if you have any questions, then let me know in the comments. I'd appreciate if you can share these free lectures playlists with as many students as possible, because I personally want to help as many students as I can. Okay. And if you want to buy these notes, then contact through the WhatsApp link provided below. And if you want to get private coaching for your specific needs, and I really encourage this because you will need exam practice, you can contact us right now, okay, using the WhatsApp link below.